Well, welcome to this Leadership and Policy Pathway overview in preparation for the Open Day coming up next week. My name is Dr. David Sands, and I'll be taking you through various details of the Leadership and Policy Pathway as a preliminary information guide prior to the Open Day. Well, let's have a little look now at the pathway aims. First of all, we want you to develop some theoretical knowledge and understanding of leading quality improvement in educational institutions of a wide range, ranging from kindergarten through to further education and higher education. We also want you to critically engage with research-informed ideas and practices related to leading and managing change within education. That particular focus on leading and managing in a changing environment is a key element of the pathway and is reflected in the units. And also we aim that you develop an awareness and an appreciation of the need for both educational leadership and policy creation to be located within a context of social justice. And that reflects one of the foundational principles of the School of Education here at Bristol. And lastly, we want you to develop an understanding of the relationship between the practice of educational leadership in various contexts and the policies which inform and drive that practice, shape that practice in a range of different contexts and jurisdictions. So there is an international, strong international flavor to the pathway. So thinking about this international complexion, who is the pathway designed for? Well, first of all, it is aimed at educational professionals in any context, but you don't have to be a current educational professional. It would be helpful if you were an aspiring, at least an aspiring educational professional. It was something that you either were already in, and that was your occupation, or it was a career aim to be some type or kind of educational professional in very wide conception there. Ideally, but not essentially, with some experience as, for example, a teacher, an administrator, a lecturer, an early years practitioner, an education manager or leader in a public or private institution or forum which provides education of one form or another, quite loosely defined. And again, you don't have to necessarily be currently practicing leadership or indeed working in policy creation, formation, or implementation. You don't have to be involved in those areas, not necessarily. But I think what you've got to have really, or what would be regarded as a very useful attribute for going on this particular pathway is it's really aimed and designed for individuals who are curious about education, leadership, and policy, and how those two elements are interconnected and how they relate to one another and affect one another through time and through change. And indeed, where these two elements may be going in the future. So that curiosity is a really important attribute, I would argue, for someone who wishes to consider this pathway. Let's have a quick look then at pathway structure. First of all, the pathway structure for the leadership and policy pathway is similar to the pathway structure for a lot of other pathways within the Master of Science education here at the School of Education at Bristol. So there are 4 core units, and each of those carries 20 credits. There is the introduction to educational inquiry, which is a core unit for all master's students, no matter what pathway they are taking. And that provides a really good grounding in research practice and project design, research project design and practice. Another core unit is quality and improvement in education, and will provide you with insights into and indeed the academic debate around attempting to pin down and define quality and improvement in education, and how cultural factors very much shape and determine those sort of conceptions. Another one of the core units is education policy in a global context, to reflect the international and global dimensions of the masters as a whole. And then finally, the last core unit is called Leading and Managing Change, which describes exactly what the focus of that unit is. Now, in addition to these 4 core units, you will do 2 other optional units, and they both carry 20 credits each. And in this area, you may want to do a couple of units which complement or supplement the units, which the core units on the leadership and policy pathway. So, for example, you may think that the unit, upon investigation by you, you may think that the unit managing people in education would be a complementary unit and strengthen the overall package that you're going to study for within this particular pathway. Or you may feel that some kind of or some greater insight into the nature of teaching and learning and the traditions, both Eastern and Western, around notions of teaching and learning would be a really good underpinning for your other studies within this pathway. So, for example, you may therefore look at contemporary perspectives on learning as a possible unit to complement the package that you're going to design. But other students regularly choose the 2 optional units to really contrast, to have a change and something quite different from their essential units within this particular pathway. So they may look at technology, they may look at international development. It really is down to you. And I can certainly provide further guidance on that, but in the end, it is an individual's informed choice in terms of selecting those other 2 units. And then, of course, you've got your dissertation, which will be 60 credits, and that will inform and develop and allow you to do some original research within the very broad pathway of leadership and policy. You can take this particular pathway, like other pathways, either full-time or part-time. If you go full-time, that would take a year, and it would typically mean there would be 3 units studied in term 1, 3 units studied in term 2, and the dissertation completed in the summer, finishing off in September. So that would be the pattern for a full-time course. If you wanted to take the master's pathway, leadership and policy pathway, in part-time, then you can do that either in 2 years or in 3 years, and there's great flexibility around how you construct those modules, those units, and which ones you take. And some of those units can be taken in short, intensive periods of time. Others can take longer. But please note, if you are going for the 2 or 3 year part-time study structure, the units, the types of units, and the pattern of those units does change from year to year. So you also will need to be, to a degree, flexible around that. Let's have a look at the typical unit design. Typically, a unit's made up of 10 consecutive weeks of teaching, 10 teaching weeks. But as I say, there are other configurations. For example, it is possible to do some units within a 3-day intensive package in order to sort of fit around work commitments and things of that nature. But typically, a unit is made up of 10 consecutive teaching weeks. There are 2 reading weeks, typically 1 in the middle of the 10 weeks and 1 at the end. So it's really 10 weeks plus 2 reading weeks within a term. For each week, there is an assigned package of activity, which we describe as a weekly learning experience. And that will be delivered through a combination of both asynchronous and synchronous learning opportunities. So there'll be activities, readings, project work, writing reports, doing mini investigations, working collaboratively with fellow students on perhaps a project or a presentation, along with lectures and seminars. But that weekly learning package is a mixture of asynchronous, in other words, you get involved in those activities in your own time and at your own choosing, and then some synchronous learning opportunities, typically lectures or seminars set at particular times where you're expected to attend. And each weekly learning experience is made up of 20 hours of study per week, and over a 10-week teaching block, that comes to 200 hours. So there is a high expectation in terms of engagement and work that needs to be done around the synchronous input. Now, in terms of the pathway, what sort of pedagogies inform the pathway? Well, the pedagogy which informs the pathway is very active. It involves you in the selection of content and learning processes. Some of that will be predetermined, but there will be opportunities to choose which sort of content, which sort of learning processes you want to take part in and engage in. It will build on your existing knowledge. All of you will bring a whole lifetime's experience of learning, as well as perhaps teaching and professional experience to the course. And that huge diversity of experience in different jurisdictions is a massive asset for the course and for each student that's on there. So you will bring your own expertise, your own experience, which will be shared with others, and they will do the same. And that's a really important part of the pedagogy within the unit, and it relates very clearly to adult learning theory. The learning will be focused on professional issues and challenges that professionals face in a variety of different leadership contexts within the educational field, and it will focus on the pedagogy that underpins the unit, the practice, the classroom practice, and the learning practices, very much focused on critical reflection. And critical reflection in that sense is evaluation, including self-evaluation. We anticipate that you will be a different person and will have a much deeper appreciation of leadership and policy when you finish the course than when you started. So how will the course be delivered in terms of the delivery of subject matter? Well, as I say, that will be in the form of some traditional forms such as lectures and seminars, but it will be interactive and collaborative. There will be group work, there'll be group presentations which depend upon the engagement of everyone in the group. It will be interactive with the lecturers and guest speakers. There will be discussion. There'll be critical engagement with the literature, a very important part of the course to develop your criticality in terms of the literature around leadership and policy. And there will be debate. And last but not least, there will be assessment and feedback. And the assessment will be both formative and summative, of course, but the formative assessment and the feedback from the formative assessment is designed to develop your learning, clarify what you need to do in order to move forward. And then the summative feedback, the detailed summative feedback you will get from your assignments is also designed to make sure that you progress in your learning throughout the course. So let's have a little look at some key pathway themes within the leadership and policy pathway. Clearly, leadership styles, the different leadership styles, of which there are hundreds. Don't worry, you won't be expected to learn hundreds. We will be selective and judicious in the leadership styles which we cover, whether it's situational, distributive, authoritative, or so and so on. But you will have a choice and the latitude, the scope to look at some other leadership styles. For example, servant leadership that might take your interest. Certainly looking at leadership styles is one key theme. The leadership of change, of course, as I've mentioned before, absolutely critical to this particular pathway. And I would argue, of course, critical to any leadership function within an educational situation. Looking at leadership effectiveness, both at the school effectiveness research, SER, teacher effectiveness research, TER, but also within the context of leadership of educational institutions. We're looking clearly at an absolutely essential theme will be a consideration of how context and culture affect and shape conceptions of leadership and indeed leadership practices. And of course, conceptions of what education is, what it means, and what it should be for. So culture and context, a very important theme within the pathway. Looking then at policy, you will be considering the question, just what is policy anyway? What shapes and forms does it take? Policy as text, policy as process, policy as practice, policy as discourse. You'll be looking and examining policy in some depth. Who makes it? At what level? How does it? How important is the implementation process? Absolutely critical to that. And looking at how policy changes, how policy works on individuals, works on leaders themselves, and changes people. How policy actually changes us as educational practitioners. And of course, you'll be looking very much at the ideological underpinnings of policy and how those ideological assumptions underpin and shape policy and how that then plays out in society and in educational institutions. So they're the main themes of the pathway, and I hope you find those of interest. But I just want to finish by addressing what I regard as the essential elements of this particular pathway. First of all, there has to be a focus on vision. It would be a very odd leader and indeed a rather unusual educational institution of whatever complexion, whether it be a small private nursery through to a huge higher education institution such as Bristol with tens of thousands of students, if it did not purport to have some kind of vision. So vision is really important within the pathway, and thinking about what sort of vision do you want to develop as a leader, and what other visions, alternative visions are there for education. And of course, vision has to be underpinned by a set of values, and looking at values in an explicit way, and trying to indeed discover some of the hidden values which might lie behind policy practice and leadership practice and policy formation is part of the pathway, a preoccupation of the pathway, shall we say. And of course, if we're looking at vision values, they have to be focused on social justice. And that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this overview, is an essential element of the pathway. It's the cornerstone of that pathway and gives it, therefore, a futures orientation. The pathway very much will look at the past in terms of previous practices and the traditions, particularly, let's say, around context and culture, which have informed and shaped education in a particular institution or particular jurisdiction, whether it be from Finland or Singapore, England, Hong Kong, whatever. But it also will have a strong futures orientation. Where is education going? How can leaders take it to where it needs to go? What are the vision and values underpinning that moral and social imperative to develop education into the future for the benefit of all. That very much is the underpinning foundation of this particular pathway. So I hope that's given you a brief overview. I hope it's sort of whetted your appetite a bit to learn a bit more. And I hope that you are successful in choosing the right pathway for you and in your application. And I look forward to talking to some of you, hopefully, during the Open Day event. Bye-bye for now, and I hope you've enjoyed this, or at least found this introduction useful.